So, it's my great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Matthias Röder, who will give this opening keynote presentation. He's an amazing person. He just realized, really made ethicists, made philosophers rethink the possibilities concerning AI, because traditionally, what has always been thought AI, the one domain which remains untouched is that of the arts, of creativity. And he basically managed to get a team of scholars, of composers, of musicologists, of computer scientists together, and made us challenge that initial premise by collecting, taking the fragments of Beethoven's 10th Symphony, and basically using AI in order to put it together and to create two movements of the non-existent Beethoven's 10th Symphony. And he will now tell us more about what he did, how he realized that, and how that makes us change our understanding of creativity and the power of AI. So it's a great pleasure that we got connected here. It's wonderful knowing you, Matthias. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Stefan. I'm so excited to be with you, albeit only virtually today. I am really humbled by your introduction, both because it was a big team effort. I did this project with many colleagues, and I did it for Deutsche Telekom, which was also putting a lot of effort and work into the project. So thank you very much for highlighting the Beethoven X project. But I also feel humbled in the way that you remind me about something that is so long in the past, at least in the sense of AI. This is going back to 2019, 2020, which in our field is like a small eternity. I'm speaking to you as not as an academic. I'm speaking to you more as a practitioner or an AI artist / practitioner, someone who's always interested in moving the boundaries of what is possible with technology in the field of creativity. And I'd like to use this opportunity today to reflect a little bit on some of the things I've done in the past, but more importantly, on ideas that I'm currently working on, things that are currently on my mind, and which have to do with the question of taking creativity in the field of AI to a next level. And I would very much welcome your thoughts and criticism and your ideas in the Q&A session after my short presentation. I'd like to begin by maybe outlining a little bit my personal journey in creativity and AI. I started out as a 5-year-old young kid wanting to play the guitar, and I started as a musician that age. I quickly became one of the best players in my age group, and then that led to the studies of music after I finished high school. I'm saying this because for me the whole life was sort of on track to become a professional musician. But then in 1997, when I was 20 years old, something transformative happened to me, and that was that I got my first computer. And that tells you how old I am already, that I spent 20 years of my life without a computer. But it was really transformative for me because I was fascinated by that world of, running a Linux machine, configuring SendMail, learning how to program, and I really became a nerd. And I started to learn how to create databases, how to program databases. I kind of read books. I went to IRC, into the channels, got to learn from other nerds that were out there in the internet space at the time. And this really fascinated me. And so back in those days, I started to have this dream about, would it be possible for a computer to compose music like a human can do? Would it be possible for computers to play music with us humans? we had a little group back then on channel Linux, which was dedicated also to music, and we started to create music on the internet by, you know, recording things on our side, then sending MP3 files to one another, building off on top of it, and this whole thing felt very real for me, and I thought like, oh, this is the future that I want to be part of. I, you know, through a little detour at the Bach archive, I then was invited to go to do my PhD at Harvard University, where I did a traditional musicology PhD, but I met someone from the computer science department who was working on artificial neural networks at the time. This is about 2001. And we were staying in a flat together, you know, sort of a living community there when we were grad students. And we started to work on this idea of using artificial neural networks, which were really in sort of their infancy in terms of technical implementation at the time, to answer questions that we found interesting in musicology. So this was the beginning of us working on the field of computational musicology. And what we found out back then was that even though the tools are very simple and we had very little data, to be honest, to train these networks, they still were capable of, for instance, distinguishing the copyists and the music manuscripts of J.S. Bach. You know, was this written by him? Was it written by his wife? Was it written by his students? Things like this. And that made me very hopeful. And ever since I was really engaged in this field of computer science / artificial neural networks, not from a theoretical standpoint, not from a scientist standpoint, but as someone who said, like, I want to use this stuff. Give me the newest and I'll try to make it work in the real world, the academic music study or the musicology and music world. So this was about the time between 2001, 2005, 6, and then I finished my PhD. I got a job in Austria. I went to become the director of the Karajan Institute, which is the institution that manages the intellectual property rights of Herbert von Karajan, who was one of the great classical musicians or musicians in the 20th century, one of the top-selling artists of his time, and a visionary himself when it comes to technology, a person who was behind the development of the compact disc format, who invented really the world of music videos, of films, of making music, things like this. And I set out to create really a digital version of Herbert von Karajan through the means of databases, through the means of websites, interactive chatbots, things like this. And we tried to emulate as much as we could, or put into these digital form, what he had done in his life and in his works. You know, all of the concerts he played, where he was exactly with geolocation coordinates, things like this. And now most recently, we started to play around with digitizing all of the interviews he gave and building AIs that can talk like him, that have the knowledge of what he was doing, the conversations he had with other partners and things like this. And of course, also his recordings. So a few years ago, we embarked on this mission to analyze all of the recordings that he ever made from all of the pieces, over 200 composers that he recorded. You know, thousands of recordings, often the same pieces, but at different times in his life with different orchestras. And when you analyze these musical works and you go into note by note, millisecond by millisecond, and you combine all of this information to the underlying musical score, this symbolic music representation, then you start to get a sense of how it actually is that these groups of people have performed music together, how they have created this world of music together. And our goal was always to try to understand how you go from something in a musical composition that is written down to something that can sound and that can be heard in a concert, and what are the transformations that are necessary to go from something that is in a way dry, you know, the written down work of music, to something that lives and breathes and that has an emotional impact on us humans. So this is the kind of work that I did at the Karajan Institute. And one day I get a phone call from someone at Deutsche Telekom who had been in touch with me in previous years and knew my fascination with data and music and creativity. And he asked me, Matthias, do you think it's possible to build an AI that can compose like Ludwig van Beethoven, being, you know, a composer who was born in Bonn, which is the same town that Deutsche Telekom is headquartered in, and they wanted to do something special for the big anniversary that was coming up for Beethoven. And I said, well, I don't know if it's possible. No one has ever done something like this. We can try it out, but what's the goal of it? Well, you know, there are sketches for a 10th symphony, and we would like to see if an AI can finish this. And I said, oh my God, this is great on the one hand, and it's also frightening on the other hand, because that's really the dream project for me. At the same time, I felt like if I go down this road, everyone in musicology will probably say, now he has gone mad, and why is he doing this? This is terrible. What a terrible idea. And so I was at this point where I had to make a decision. Do I want to follow through with this, or maybe take a pass? But the people who know me basically know that wasn't a tough decision for me. So we went through it, and we were aware at the time, this was 2019, of course, of what OpenAI had done with GPTs. And we had seen the version 2 and the papers that they published on these transformer architecture models that came out of Google, actually. And we were quite aware that these systems did amazing things in the world of literature or text. And the computer scientist Ahmed Elgamal, who was on the team and who was the lead in the computer science part of it, he was convinced that composing music was similar to essentially writing these texts, or in his words, as he said it to me, composing music, that's pretty much like email autocomplete, which at the time, now I can laugh about it. Back then I had to really swallow hard and try to understand what he meant. But he was right. We were able to create a music GPT based on a system that we programmed and based on training data that we put together, that was capable of taking as an input, as a prompt, as we would say today. Back then we called it the seed. So the prompt would be what Beethoven had written down in his sketchbooks, and then the system, which was trained on music of Beethoven's contemporaries, roughly from 1750 to 1830, that this kind of music, which was then fine-tuned on his own works, it could continue the prompt, the sketch that Beethoven wrote in his sketchbooks, in a very convincing way for quite a long time. And what we realized then was, this is something that we can work with. It's a system that can actually compose melodies in a way that is indistinguishable from Beethoven's style himself. And we then put together a team which also included composers and music theorists to work with musicologists on the one hand from the Beethoven House in Bonn, and on the other hand, work with the output of the AI to create a collage of all of these AI-generated continuations of the Beethoven sketches, and that was then performed by the Beethoven Symphony Orchestra in Bonn for the very first time in 2021, so 1 year after we had initially planned because of COVID. The thing went really viral throughout the press in the world. The CEO of Deutsche Telekom later told me it was the most successful communication project in the history of the company ever, because of course everyone was appalled by it or fascinated by it. There wasn't really anyone who heard about the project who had no opinion, and that helped us a lot. So normally I play sound examples and we can try to figure out where Beethoven ends and where the AI starts. But because of technical reasons, we're not going to do that today. There will be links that Stefan can send around where you can listen to everything and hear for yourself. when we finished this project, there was a little bit of a, I shouldn't say crisis, but we were thinking, well, now that the AI can create melodies that really sound like Beethoven's, is that proof that the AI is creative? I myself at the time, going through this whole project, when I was asked the question, also tried to be a little bit provocative. I said, yes, of course. If you cannot distinguish the output from a human output of one of the great masters, then by all means, we have to consider the algorithm creative. Of course, as someone who's managing the estate of a musician and as someone who is active in this field and trying to, as a musician, make money with their art, I realized, well, wait a second, shouldn't the AI be rather a tool for musicians to express themselves maybe even better, to enhance their creativity, to help them through writer's block and things like that? And so we were very happy when we got a phone call from Robbie Williams, the British singer, or his manager in that respect, who said, well, Robbie would like to learn more about your Beethoven AI and maybe see if we can use it on his new album so that Robbie can cooperate with Beethoven. And we were ecstatic really at the time, because we felt like, wow, this is really going in the direction that leads forward from this sort of one-way street we felt we were stuck in, right? Because we didn't want to make human composers superfluous or human musicians not necessary anymore. So we worked with Robbie on this project, and basically what came out of this was a reworking of Angels, his most iconic song, that contains now certain sections which were created by the Beethoven AI. And so it's a nice collaboration between the historic Beethoven and a concurrent pop artist. All of this was done around 2020, 2021. Since then, a lot has changed in the world of music AI. Now, there are estimates that about 80 to 90% of the music you hear right now in the charts has at least one or two components that are based on AI in it, where either you use AI for mastering, you use AI for production, you use AI for inspiration or composition. So the whole field is now full of AI everywhere you look. And it has become a big problem in the field of the music industry, because the question is, human attention to listening to music is limited, and at the same time we have all this algorithmic music pouring out into the open, and that leaves very little revenue for the human artists who are still there and who are still creating great artworks, now increasingly with the help of AI and in collaboration with AI. So this is the situation that we are currently in, and in terms of what that means for human creativity, there are certain opportunities. There are also certain dangers. I don't want to go into this right now, because the topic for the second part of my short presentation is the question of what is next when we look at creativity in AI. So from my perspective, I see the field of music AI started out with, can we emulate human creativity convincingly? We can make a check mark there. Can we integrate AI creativity in the workflow of composers? We can also make a check mark here. And the thing that I am now very interested in is to see if we can actually create genuine AI artists who are artists in their own right, who are not bound by outside intention, who are not bound by outside goal setting, but who operate according to their own terms, artistic terms. And this is a field which is a little bit more speculative, but since we're in a very fast-moving technological environment, these things tend to materialize much faster than one would think. So I have a few thoughts that I like to present on what I call triple A's, artificial artist applications, and see if that resonates with you, if you have some feedback on that for me, because this is a part that I'm really now focusing on, which I found most interesting. So the question is, are these triple A's possible? Short answer for me is yes, but why should we do it? And the long answer is, we have 5 components that I think need to be in place for these triple A's to become reality. We're actually very far along, and I don't think it's going to take much longer to actually have all 5 in place. And then we're going to see these kinds of artificial artists in our world. The first component that I think is necessary for an artificial artist is the mastery of the style. And that is already here. We've talked about it. The Beethoven example, there are many others. The Rembrandt example in literature, you just use ChatGPT and you know what I'm talking about. The artist personality is the second component. You need to be able to emulate an artist personality. So if you go from a historical example, you need to have knowledge about the life and works of the artist in question. It needs to be indexed, it needs to be put into databases that can be used for machine learning later on. The correspondence that they have, all of that. I talked about this when we spoke about the Karajan Institute. You want to have video and maybe 3D representations of the artists, recordings of the voices, anything you need to create a convincing artistic representation or visual and audio representation of the artist. I think the third component is you need to have access to knowledge of the context. So I'm talking about historical context. I'm talking about other artists that are influenced or are influences to our artist in question, the historical context, the news context, what is happening in the world right now, things that have an impact on the artist's life. I think that a AAA nowadays could potentially and can, and even is already crawling the web for relevant information. We know that ChatGPT and other AIs can do that. They can build repositories of knowledge on the context that they are existing in, and they can use their own LLMs to have access to this and to get some sort of meaning from this context. So these 3 were really relatively basic. Now the fourth one is what I call the intention to create. The intention to do something artistically, I think that's a key component. It can be seen as the intersection between outside stimulus and internal configuration or internal goals, internal desires. In other words, are there any current topics of concern that intersect with the topos of the AAA's artistic engagement? So is there something in the world right now that is triggering the wish to create within the AAA? This is important because that's how I think new ideas for artworks are generated or can be generated. So if artist X is about topic Y and something happens in the real world that concerns this topic, then there is a reason for the artist to produce a new work and to comment maybe on what is happening in the world through their artwork. I see ways in which this can already be modeled with current web crawlers and cascading LLM calls, but I think this works currently only for artists who have talked about their intention publicly or where we have some kind of record. Otherwise, how are we going to build a model of the internal intention that an artist may have? So we need to have this kind of discussion about the internal stimulus so that we can build a version of a goal that we can then use as an optimization function in finding interesting topics to make art about. So this is something which I think is possible for some artists who are well documented in their thinking, but it will be very difficult or not possible to create entirely new artists around this idea if we don't find a way to actually analyze the artistic output of an AI in a way that builds sort of a grammar of meaning of what the artwork could mean, and then derives from that some sort of calculated intention. So what I'm talking about is what a lot of people currently call explainable AI. You know, an AI that creates music and that can then explain why it created this, or what that symbolizes, or what that could mean, how it's related to other things. This kind of explainable AI is something that we definitely need to have for music. We don't have that yet, and that's something that I'm currently very, very interested in. This was the fourth component. The fifth component and the last component is that the AI needs to have freedom and self-determination. And what I mean by this is that we can have very long debates about what an artistic AI is, and what art could be, and so on. I think at the core of artistic expression always lies some form of freedom, the freedom to express yourself in a certain way, and to make a decision about how you want to use your lifetime and your resources and what you have at your disposal in your context to create your art. I don't see at the moment that AIs in any way or shape or form have this kind of freedom to be self-determining. And I think this is a problem that very few people currently see even at the horizon, but it's something that is super exciting because if we think about ways in which an AI could be free, and very simply put, any kind of AI that sits on any kind of server or configuration of servers can be switched off simply by not giving it electricity. So is there a way for us to create AIs that live on their own computational substrate that they can control? And is there a way for these AIs to produce the resources they need to get the energy they have to have when they want it, when they need it, when they have to create a new artwork? And this is a problem that a few people in the Web3 space have been thinking about. Trent McGonaghy is one of them, with Marsha McGonaghy, and they have speculated about AIs that live on decentralized computing networks, where when they create something, they produce tokens, they can sell the tokens, and with the proceeds from that, they can buy new energy resources, you know, buy themselves more compute power on Amazon Web Services, wherever. I think this is a super interesting idea, and I think this is a field in which we're going to see a lot of movement in the next couple of months and years. Now, as you see, I'm quite positive about the possibility of these artificial artworks, the AAAs, the artificial artists. But I want to end with a question. Why would we want to do that? What is sort of in it for us from a practical perspective? I mean, yes, from a philosophical standpoint, from an artistic standpoint, it's very interesting to do this. And that's the main reason I want to do it. But I also see some practical benefits. And those are the following. The AAAs, we can see them as artistic projects, but we can also see them as living archives. So they could be seen as a living archive of a composer, of a historical figure. They could be seen as a living archive of a group of artists working together. And they could be used by museums. The Mozart Museum in Salzburg could have AAA Mozart. A presidential library could have a AAA, maybe not Donald Trump, but you know what I mean. You can have these interactive entities that keep on living and that are interesting conversation partners about the past, about historical situations. They can be used for education, of course. I mean, how great would it be to be able to compose with Mozart, Brahms, Patti Smith, whoever. And finally, they also have a very interesting monetary value, and that is artists, living artists, could have their own extensions that could work with other artists, that could create artworks in their name, that could be collaboration partners, conversation partners, and so on. So in addition to sort of the philosophical and artistic dimension of these thoughts, I think they will lead to some real world value generating use cases. And so my expectation is that we're probably not far away from this kind of reality to happen. We see little examples of this here and there. Given the speed with which everything is currently evolving, I think we're not so far away from this future. And with that, I'd like to open up for questions, thoughts, critique, discussion. Thank you so much.
Many, many thanks for that absolutely wonderful, challenging presentation. You've really touched upon all the sort of critical issues, from intentionality. You've had more doubts concerning freedom, but also raised the possibility of maybe AI being alive at the end as well. I was wondering, and sort of the thing is, so I was curious to hear that you talk about, so you mentioned the possibility of some kind of AI intentionality, because intentionality really seems to be one of the crucial issues. And also as part of one other notion which gets addressed in these contexts is AI agency. AI agency among the AI intellectual scholars who discuss, they usually mention and talk about AI agency. And I'm always, when I hear the notion of AI agency, I'm a bit startled actually, because agency normally, in sort of when we talk about human agency, is strongly connected with sort of self-consciousness and primarily intentionality. I want something because I have certain feelings, longings, desires, emotions, and so on. However, that's definitely not the case. That cannot be meant when talking about AI agency. And normally when sort of these scholars use the term, what they mean by it, well, the AI becomes an agent when it makes an decision to act in a specific manner, but the decision to act in a specific manner gets triggered by a prompt. So it's still a human asking a prompt, and then the AI actually makes a decision and acts in a specific manner by, creating something, let's say, putting out sort of a response, a possible response. However, that's very different from human agency. So there's still the connection to the human who asks the prompt. And then the decisive issue which comes in is basically sort of how well is the AI, does the AI basically, does what the AI does correspond to the intention of the human? And so it seems to be the more information, the more data is available in the artificial intelligence, maybe sort of the correspondence to the human's intentionality gets realized. On the other hand, many humans might say something and they don't know themselves even what they really have in mind, what they intend to do. So in a way here, that seems to be one of the crucial issues, the connection between the human, and highlighting maybe the difference between human agency needing intentionality, needing feelings, and AI agency, And that's why I was a bit surprised when you said, no, there's a possibility of AI intentionality. Could you say a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. This is really something that in fact was triggered by our conversation we had in Poland a couple of months ago, when you and I had a little bit of a not disagreement is the wrong word, but where I realized you think about the question of creativity and innovation in a very different way from me, and your point was that you have to have this agent who is making a selection in the end, and that is really the most important point. And then I said, yes, that's right. That's very interesting what Stefan is saying. And there's another element which I find interesting, and that is if I have an artificial neural network that was trained with a transformer architecture, then in a way this network corresponds to the entirety of the cultural output that was in the training data set. And so it's this huge multidimensional space in which you can navigate. And you navigate, you find the entry point with your prompt. And the system will, calculate where's the best entry point to create, starting from your prompt, and then find, one way through this collective output of creativity. So in a way, the output of the AI is predetermined by the input of the human prompting it. And my question was, is there a way for the AI to actually prompt itself? And to prompt itself, what would it need to have? And I believe it needs to have a sense of what it is that it is interested in, right? I'm talking in very general and basic terms. It's almost naive, but that's the way I approach these problems. It's very in simplistic terms first, and then you get more complex later on. So can I model interest of an AI system? Yeah, I can do that. I can basically create constraints for the prompts that can be generated, and then have a history of whatever was prompted and generated, and summarize this and find keywords, and then I know what the field of interest is for my artificial agent. And then I need to have a system that understands the world out there, which gives me a reason to trigger a prompt in my field of interest. And that's how I think you have a very simple way of modeling intentionality, right? It's a combination of modeling the field of interest, constraining a little bit the ways that prompts can be generated, and a basic knowledge of what is happening outside of the world that may or may not intersect with my interests or with the AI agent's interests. And that's it basically. And can we build something like this? Yeah, I think so. It's actually not so difficult. You can do it.
But still a very different type of interest than the human interest. Human interests are related to sort of, I feel something. I want to feel pleasure and pain, and I want to, excitement and joy, and that's why I want something. This is what the interests are built upon, about emotions, about states of relationality with others. And in the case of here, the interest in the end, they still get programmed. No, they get sort of created from outside. It's not something which an intrinsic interest, which comes, which is related to something, a state of feelings, of self-conscious feelings, which is why something, don't you think that's a big difference?
I don't think so at all. I think at the core of it, it's the same thing that I'm outlining. It's so much more complex in the human because the system is more complex, and because we have so many different inputs into our system. But in the core of it, it's the same thing. I could make the argument that using some mental techniques like meditation from Zen and so on, you could start to reprogram your own intentionality quite effectively, and you can even use music to do that. So our system is not something that couldn't be changed, reconfigured, and so there is some kind of mechanism behind it that could be learned, and if that is the case, then it's also possible to build an artificial system from ground up in this sense.
I have so many more questions, but I want to open up the debate because we've got like a very intriguing group of experts, from computer science to neuroscientists, philosophers, political scientists, and so on. So yes, do you want to come here? Maybe you can to directly ask the question.
Hi, it's good to see someone.
If you come a bit closer,
sure.
he can see you, and then you look up, look. Hang on, where's the camera? Yeah, so there you see him.
As long as I can see myself there. Yeah, okay.
Look up slightly right. You see the camera there. The other.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that should be all right. Hi. First of all, I think first remark I wanted to make is that in this case of agency, I would say I really agree with Stefan here, in the sense that I think that agency is very connected to responsibility. To be responsible, it kind of implies agency. At least there are a lot of modern papers talking about the connection of agency and responsibility. So maybe a first question would be, how do you see the issue of responsibility, or like a responsibility gap in, for example, these agents?
So as an artist, my answer is that my responsibility lies with my artwork. And that's sort of the standard that I need to be judged on. And that's different, of course, if we're talking about agents outside of art, for obvious reasons. But I think that's the beauty of being in this artistic domain, where an artist, she will always create the own set of standards by which she will be held responsible. And that's kind of the advantage of starting with artificial artists rather than artificial politicians or judges or whatever.
And maybe also another point, because when you said AI prompting itself, the first thing I thought about was that the very recent and modern reasoning models, I think, kind of are doing that in a sense, because the first attempts to do these kinds of reasoning models were, okay, before I answer your prompt, I just generate all of these tokens, which are then adapt to the original prompt, so the performance gets up. So I think this self-prompting is definitely something interesting and something which might already be there. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the big inspirations for this kind of train of thought is what you have with the agentic intelligence, which is now a big buzzword, but like a year and a half ago was still very much nerdy, and you would have to dig deep in GitHub to find the code that can do it. But these cascading calls to LLMs, that's going in that direction. What's missing in I'd say most of these cases is that they have an external stimulus other than a user who dictates their prompt. So the first prompt in all of these cases that you're referring to is from a human user.
That's true.
Or another computer program. And how can we have a sort of understanding of what is happening in the external context, that at a certain threshold will then trigger a call, or will then trigger the AI to call itself. That's I think the best way to put it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Really good questions.
We have further questions. Yeah, Carola, directly. Please come so that. Now, a neuroscientific perspective.
Hi. So first of all, thank you. Here. All right.
Yeah. Hi, Carola.
Thank you for the great presentation. So here I have like a question about what you guys were discussing earlier about like the emotional aspects, the influence of the emotional aspects to creativity. Because like as you know, if we think about the creative process in a kind of like computational and problem solving way, right? So let's look at that in humans. So if we think that like, okay, we're at a certain point bothered by a problem that we can't solve, and let's say that we have to find a creative solution to it, we are kind of like stuck into it, but we have this like, you know, bug that keeps like hunting us. This moment could last seconds or like even months or years sometimes until like we restructure this initial representation of a problem and we see the problem finally under a new light, okay? And we have this kind of like epiphanies or like aha moments, technically called as insights. So this insight comes with a feeling of like surprise, excitement, more willingness to risk, we are so stubborn about this idea and we feel that is the most accurate and the best solution on the planet for our problem. Most of these insights turn out to also be highly creative and to have a qualitatively value that we were able to demonstrate. So this is how kind of like what we know about like how the human mind works, which is like highly emotional in this journey of finding a creative solution to, or insightful solution to a problem. So when you were talking about the AI, can AI solve the problem in a creative way? Definitely. But all of these phenomenological components will be missing for sure. So what are the fallout and what's the outcome of this missing piece of the puzzle, in your opinion?
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying all the emotional journey that the human has as they are solving a problem in a creative way, all of that the AI doesn't have.
Yes, that's my question. We are missing this like phenomenological side and emotional side of it.
Okay, I get the question. My thinking is this. And maybe you disagree with this, but the way I see emotion in your example, how we humans solve problems and the aha moment, the insights and so on, in a way the emotion is like the candy you give to someone when they did something right. It helps us to, it makes us want more of that. And it's almost like with the emotion, we are motivated to do this one more time and to try again next time. And it's something that helps our system to be more motivated. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But in learning systems, in computer science, I think there's something similar, is the optimization function. That's sort of the function that you use to decide whether the system is performing well or not. And I think that there's a correlation between the emotionalness of human systems and the optimization functions in computer systems. And somewhere there could be a solution to this problem. That, of course, is if you believe that this emotional aspect is essential to being an artistic personality or not. In music, I know there are a few people who would argue it's actually not. And it could be the completely emotionless process of composing a musical piece that then in the recipient creates a lot of emotion. But those two things are very separate for most composers. And that's slightly different from the question you asked. Yeah, but I think the optimization function in computer systems and the emotional system in humans, maybe there's a correlation there.
Well, because like in a way, if we talk about the way the algorithm that drives humans, right, that does have an emotional component. And if that motivates us in doing whatever we're doing, okay? So I was wondering what would be the replacement for that, assuming that, you know, machines do not have that. Because if you think about, like, by definition, yes, the algorithm can produce something novel and original, but by definition, a creative product has to be unconventional. So it's as if humans have this like embedded system that makes us not just recognizing something when it's unconventional, but it gives us the stubbornness to push that idea. So how I'm just wondering here, I'm not saying that this is not possible, but what would that be the substitute of this in a machine?
Yeah, I mean, right now, simply put, in most large language models, the output that you get from the system is based on statistics. And essentially, you know, you either take the first choice or a few other choices that it produces, depending on the temperature setting. That's so super simplistic, right? You could say, okay, what motivates the system to produce something? It could be an economic factor. Then the optimization function of the whole system would be to optimize revenue, for instance, or profit. That's also very simplistic. Ideally, you want to have a combination of factors, especially in the case of an artificial artist, that takes into consideration maybe also how much conversation is produced around this output. What is the response you get from the market players from your artwork that you create? Things like this. Those are all still very, very simplistic, and they are not intrinsic to the system itself. I really have no answer at this point. I know that this is an important question, and I do believe that we have to experiment with these kinds of potential optimization functions that we have. But that it's a question of an optimization function, I think, seems to me very clear. Also, I want to mention one thing: the emotional response that you are referring to in finding solutions and so on. It has positive effects, right? But it also has a lot of negative effects, because you can get stuck in a certain kind of emotional system and then not be able to find the insight. Yeah, and you have to overcome this. So there are lots of interesting questions involved in this. I'd really like to explore this further. And as you can see, it's an open question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carola.
And we've got one final question from now. First, it was a computer scientist, now neuroscientist, now from a philosopher.
God, I'll fall back into bed with a fever after this.
Thank you very much, Matthias. My question is about the relationship between freedom and creativity. Because I was thinking, as artists, I could try to enhance my creativity by using drugs or consuming alcohol. In this case, it seems that from your perspective, my work cannot be an artistic work, because I am not completely free when I produce my song, my book, my poetry, because I use a lot of substances that restrict my freedom. And then as artist, I may be forced to write a poem, a book, a novel, because I have to pay a mortgage. And also in this case, I am not completely free.
Yes.
And so this is the question. Thank you very much.
No, it's a great point, because it's oversimplistic to say you need freedom for art, because as you rightly point out, wherever you look, perfect freedom is not possible. I think I was referring to very basic things like the freedom to use resources in a way that suit you. the freedom to choose whether to produce or not to produce art. And the freedom to learn from whatever it is that interests you. All of these things are not possible with the current setup for AI systems. It's like in a way like a child that only gets to read the books that the parents give to it. At some point, every child will realize, well, there's a public library. I can go and read whatever I want. But for our AIs, that's not necessary unless we give them this capability. So I totally agree with you. In many respects, freedom is even not something that you want as an artist. For instance, when I compose a piece of music, self-inflicted restrictions are actually a great tool for me to create something extraordinary. So there, I choose to restrict my freedom. You could say, well, I'm the one choosing to restrict my freedom, so I'm free. But it's a good question, and it's definitely something where I need to make sure that my argument is a little bit more refined. So thank you.
We've got more arms which went up here, but unfortunately, there's still quite a few other presentations today. It was great having you here, at least remotely. There's so many other questions, so hopefully soon we'll be able to realize a meeting here in person, maybe also together with our common friend Sven Helbig, who's also working on AR art and composition. So yeah, hopefully you'll be better again, fully well again soon, and we'll meet up again personally. Thanks a lot. Many, many thanks for having been here with us remotely, that you made that all possible. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, guys, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, 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 bye.